So, Joran, thanks for being here with me on another live.
Absolutely.
Appreciate your time. And this is coaching week, right? So we've been talking about coaching. We've been sharing some of our favorite books on coaching, and that's why I thought it would be really important for us to have a conversation about coaching.
Yes.
So, there's a lot of questions to ask, right? But I guess one of the foundational questions would be, what makes a good coach, in your opinion?
Oh, I think the best coaches that I've seen are able to hold the long view, the long arc, the curve of development, the spiral that a person is on, hold space for that growth without judgment and without imposing some kind of agenda of their own on how they think that growth and development should occur, at what time, and at what stages things should happen. So that's one, right? Being able to hold space and kind of have that long view and just be involved in both deep and active listening, with someone. I do believe that another quality or criteria of a great coach is that they have a belief, they have a deep-seated belief in human potential. I feel like that's not, I think it's something we can nurture or develop as coaches, but I think it's largely something that if you don't have that belief, it's a hard road to get there. It means that there's something in your environment or your background that has shown you that kind of growth and development isn't possible. And if you don't believe in that for yourself, it makes it all the more difficult to believe in that for other people. So I think that real deep belief in human potential and change and growth is vital. And it's connected to the first, but like just a bank of questions to ask, right? Because I feel like the urge to fix and being a guy too, like being a man, there's this real intense urge to like, oh, here's a thing you can try, right? Or here's how I remedied that in the past, or let me fix that for you even, right? Like there's this urge to want to fix and help. And coaches don't do that. It might look like tough love, it might look like, a coach isn't helping, but really what a coach wants to see from you is you do the thing yourself. Coach is waiting for you to say the words. The coach is waiting for you to prove it to yourself, right? The coach gets no satisfaction from a Band-Aid or a quick win. They are the best ones, I think, setting you up for the ability, with the coping mechanism, the language, the vocabulary, the habits, the behaviors, all of that should be in you. That toolbox should be in you, not something you rely on the coach for when you get in trouble. You should be building that toolbox yourself. And that's what a coach helps you do.
Awesome. Wow. Yeah. I think that was a really exact way to look at the best version of coaching, right? Because in this arena that is so big, because from my perspective anyway, I feel like there's a lot of coaches out there, more so every day, that specialize in various things, right? But what makes a good coach is really an important distinction for people to start becoming aware of when they are looking for coaching help. So, to that point that I just mentioned, do you feel like the coaching arena is saturated? Or do you feel like it's like a lawyer, like there's always room for one more good one, right?
Yeah. Well, there's always room for one more good one. I think that, but I think that the numbers, like we discovered when we interviewed Eric Maisel, who's the world's foremost creativity coach, I asked him that question, and he said, on paper, it might look like there's a lot of coaches. And when you get certified or trained to be a coach, you might get into the coaching world and look around and say, holy shit, there's 100 coaches on my block alone. Where is there room for me in this market? How am I ever going to find clients? But what he said was that the numbers don't lie. The numbers, according to the International Coaching Federation or whatever it is, show that 90% of those coaches don't practice coaching, which is that they might be selling courses, they might be doing things online, but they're not sitting across from a person and doing coaching with people. And that to me is coaching. Like, I'm sure, and I don't want to invalidate people who are publishing workbooks or creating amazing transformative content. We need that work too. In my mind, my opinion is coaching is when you sit with someone and you coach them, right? So if that's true, if those numbers are true, there's plenty of room. There's plenty of room for more of that coaching in the world. And no, I think the more the merrier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think coaching takes on a couple different forms too, right? Like you just mentioned some modalities or some tools that things that people use to help coach others or facilitate transformation through workbooks and texts that they've created. So
courses.
I think, yeah. And I think that kind of speaks to everybody receives information differently. Everybody learns differently. Sometimes, depending on the stage that someone's at, it might be a little bit too vulnerable to be face to face with a coach, right? But they might really feel something from their workbook that was published that they read, just to share story that way or share experience that way and say, hey, me too, or I can relate, or hey, that mindset shift really does make me feel better, or whatever. So yeah, I think to your point, not to invalidate any coach and their style, but yes, in my experience, and obviously in yours too, the most impactful shifts have been made with these kind of interactions, right, face to face. So
yeah, I think agree. That there's place for self-study. There's place for reading a book. There's place for self-help and self-improvement. There's a place for self-paced courses, right? Or these workbooks that you're going to do on your own. And that might move the needle in yourself. And that's what I call the intrapersonal work. Like, you've got to have the work done for yourself too. And continue to do that intrapersonal work of integration and shadow and whatever other, work that you need to work on for yourself. But then there's the interpersonal work, right? And I think that when you take a step, are able to sit across from a coach, just like you would with a therapist, right? Just be able to sit there and be vulnerable and open and tell the stories that you think are important, or describe the scenarios, be self-aware about how you're reacting or responding to these things in your environment. When you invite someone else into that space and have that coach-client relationship, that is the microcosm of the larger work you're doing, which is interpersonal work. You're getting better at working with other people, of communicating with other people, of leading other people, of following other people. All of that work is the dance of interpersonal work. So there's room for self-study. There's room for the intrapersonal, but don't confuse it, right, with the interpersonal work, which is really that coach-client relationship, which sets you up for success in the world.
And why is that important, Joran? You're talking about intra versus inter. Why is interpersonal so important? And is it important for everybody? Or is it important if you are looking towards some metric of external success? Is it important because it's part of story, and the more we're communing with the outside, our outer story, the more we have the ability to influence that space, to see more of, I guess, what we would like to see in the world. Like, why is that important?
Well, you asked if it was important for everyone. And I think that if you were a lighthouse keeper, and didn't have to be around people, and all you had to do was keep your environment functioning and not have to interact with yeah, the stories of other people or the expectations of other people, or deal with your anticipation of being around other people, or that energy that comes along with just being near other people. If you never have to deal with that, yeah, maybe not be important, you know.
Mhm.
I think of the example of the monk too, like the monastic life, but then there's this real sense of connecting with the other in monastic life. When we're talking about God or spirit or source, ultimate mystery, there's a sense of an ultimate other, that spirituality in second person that you can navigate and engage with through prayer, right? So that's, even the monk needs to be able to communicate well and have the tools in place for that interpersonal work. Because even if it's not a human being, we're talking about dialogue, right? Being in dialogue with an other. So I think it's a rare exception that these tools would not be valuable to a person.
Mhm. That's a great point. Yeah, thanks for elaborating on that, because even the lighthouse keeper needs to at some point pass the torch, right, of what he or she knows
Right.
about the functioning of a, a lighthouse.
Yeah.
So yes, communication is almost always important. Where do you go, or what do you do to grow and develop as a coach? Because, like every profession, right, there's some sort of continuing education, whether it's voluntary or mandatory, right? Especially when you're interacting with people on a regular basis, you want to keep pushing boundaries. So how do you go about doing that?
Oh man, I try to find people who are, and here's a growth edge for me too, is I try to find people who are more experienced than I am. That's usually, for me, what that's looked like in my life is I've found a couple like older white guys who are, kind of in my world that I can lean on as a mentor. And there's a difference, I should clarify too, the difference between a mentor and a coach and a sponsor. Those are three completely different things.
Mm,
The mentor is somebody that you seek out. The mentor client relationship is typically driven by or maintained by the client, right? Like, I'm going to seek out my mentors if I have questions about things. The coach, that relationship is highly managed by the coach, right? And there are things that the coach keeps the other accountable for that the mentor might not. The sponsor would then be somebody that you might give a leg up to or take them under your wing within a specific silo or organization. They might not do any coaching or mentoring, but they would be your advocate internally to help you, along a specific career path, and maybe help make connections for you or help you along. So they're just those three things, to making the clarification between those three roles too.
yeah, thanks for that, because that's important.
Because I have mentors that I would consider to be my coaches, but that they wouldn't, I'm sure, because it's not an official coach-client relationship. But they coach me plenty when we get on calls, So coach/mentors that I have are who I would lean on and look to for that growth, to provide that reflecting back to me what they're hearing and what I'm saying, identifying, some of the things that they think I might need to work on. That tough love, being able to take that tough love from people.
Mm-hmm.
That's where I, when I get it, I'm like, oh, that it might sting, but it's always true, so I love hearing it, and it's stuff I get to work on then. Where my growth edge is then is to find coaches or mentors who are younger than I am. And I think that's vital for people, to have somebody in your life who you're looking to, who is from the next generation that does not see things the way you see things. And as old as it may make you feel, to have these people as mentors, it's so important. It's so important because, the next generation does think differently about things. I'm Generation X, and I'm just as comfortable with, around a VHS tape as I am around streaming something on Netflix. I'm just as comfortable with a newspaper as I am around an RSS feed. But the digital natives, it's a different way of thinking. It's a different, like you said, modality. It's a different way they interact with the world. So when you have mentors like that, who are, I don't even want to say, it brings to mind like the neurodivergence, right? But it's more of it's just a way they move through and understand the world. If you can get diversity in that thinking and that approach among the people in your life, I think you're much better off. So that's a growth edge of mine, but I doesn't mean I'm not seeking it every day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think maybe that would go back to that a couple of weeks ago. We were talking about, or got on the topic of failure, and how if you're failing 15% of the time, it's one of the better ways to learn, because you're still inspired by the 85% success rate, but that 15% growth curve is giving you the opportunity to actually learn exponentially. Do you think that there's a similar curve with, interacting with mentors / coaches, that perhaps 15% of your interactions should be with way different subgroup or culture than what you're used to, or who use different language perhaps than you would use? Or do you think that it should be actually flipped around, where perhaps the majority of who you're experiencing on a regular basis should be outside of the box of your normal day-to-day comfort zone, especially if you are a coach, because we are the ones who inherently do want to bring insight and ideas and inspiration and learn how to hold space in a different way. And the only way to do that is through constantly putting ourselves in the fire. There's no other way around it. But it's getting comfortable being uncomfortable a lot, right? This is like one of those professions that there is no easy button. It's not like you learn it, you get your degree, deuces, okay, now I'm off to the races. It's nonstop. The good coaches, right? But what makes a good coach, back to that, I think that does take all forms, for this exact reason, is that not everybody receives information the same way. Not everybody speaks the same language. So perhaps what inspires you versus what inspires someone else is going to look completely different. So I think just always pushing the envelope, like you said, and making the soil really fertile through several different means is important. So yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Well, you asked about the balance. I would advise against. I know how tempting it might be to be out of boredom or hunger, to have 80% of your time occupied by the new and the novel and the challenging. I think that's a recipe for disaster. I think that as humans, we need homeostasis. We need equilibrium. We need the sense of the familiar and the sense of certainty. And we need that to be the majority of the time that we're in. I think that bodily and physically, if that was 80% of the time we spent in the new and the novel, I think our bodies would go into crisis. I don't know that it could be sustainable. I think the body would react to that. And I think 20% is probably fine. We talk about, listening versus, inquiry. I want to be listening more than I'm speaking, and the 80-20 rule is good for that. We talk about, activity within organizations and where I should be planning and strategizing and allocating resources along innovation horizons, and 20% is good for that far off third horizon disruptive activities within an organization. Again, whether we're talking about an individual or a business, I think that any more than 20% might affect the equilibrium within the system.
Meaning that it just can be very ungrounding, and then perhaps someone comes out on the other side not knowing at all who they are, with a lot more questions than answers, which kind of sounds like a life stage too. At the same time, that sounds like the teenage stage, right? You talk a lot in your corporate coaching model about the life cycle or the life stage of businesses, right? Yeah. So, is there at some point throughout that stage the need for a different type of coach or mentor, right? Just depending on, using that as an example, in the teenage stage, does that mean throw spaghetti against the wall and see what noodles stick? Or does that mean, no, this is the time to really bring in a more solid structure or framework? That's, because I think about parenting then, right, a little bit, because coaching, mentoring, you can't not think about parenting, because it's like such an easy line, right? And I think about in the teenage years as a human, you are, depending on the parenting that you're receiving, you could very well be ungrounded in a lot of ways, or you could be overly, you could feel like you're in a place of militance, right? And somewhere in between, the Goldilocks zone tends to be good for most people. But I think also too, depending on the individual, they have specific needs. Some are more emotional than others. Some are more, stoic than others, etc. So I think it all lends to when the student is ready, the teacher appears, right? And these opportunities to facilitate and opportunities to coach tend to come very organically just by where a company is at the time, and the message that's being broadcast by that consultancy, and what they're experiencing,
Yeah. I would say they can come organically in that I think what I hear you saying is that the organization has a sense of self-awareness and knows what stage they're at, and it might arise organically. It might also have, the parenting analogy is sound. I think what you're describing is the teenager stage in an individual. That's when that parent / coach would back off of the tough love and do that first thing we talked about, which was just hold space for the spiral of growth, right? Just give them love and know that they're going to develop trust, that you've equipped them and they're going to do okay. Let them learn from their own failures, things like that, make their own mistakes, fall on their own sword. And I think organizationally, not only is there the cycle of the business as it grows and develops and moves from that incubation to, toddler to teenager to, teenagers, typically that kind of reckless spending and reckless decision making, post startup, when you've got the team, you've got some, some capital. And then you've got that zone of maturity, zone of maximization, adulthood, and then you've got the decline. You might be moving into irrelevance or institutionalization and then death. But it's important to remember that this thing that we're talking about is fractal in nature, and that even when you are, let's say, at the zone of maturity, you still need teenager thinking somewhere within your organization. You still need somebody in the org who's willing to take risks and be impulsive and make decisions quickly and be right. Like, this stuff just doesn't go away. There's not really a center of gravity. It's like a flywheel, like as the org moves along the stages of development. And just like we train for innovation horizons too, you need to think differently at each stage. And if you've got an innovation portfolio that's active on all three stages, you need 3 separate ways of thinking, ways of managing, ways of leading, ways of communicating, ways of testing and validating ideas. It's like having 3 companies in one. That's why innovation's hard, right? Or can be. So I think, and if we're going to loop this back around to coaching, it can come around organically. It can also be strategic. An organization can also say, we need a coach because we're at this stage and this stage. So we need a coach who's adept at communicating this way and this way, or we need two separate coaches or coaching teams to support our organization internally because we've got these three different portfolios happening. So you can be strategic with it, or you can diagnose it and say, okay, well, this didn't work and let's try something else.
So what are some of those tools then, if you don't mind sharing, that are in your tool belt that you kind of use with corporate clients, maybe just, a couple to share that you feel are kind of like necessary in how you structure those interactions, like.
I just have a million questions, I mean, that is my thing. It's like, it's not only like a spirit or an attitude of curiosity, like, oh, I have a million questions about that, right? Like that is true in one sense. And it's also a very concrete, that's my toolbox. I literally have a toolbox filled with a million questions. So when things come up, I have questions I can ask. A lot of what I see with leaders is that they just want to do more. They want to give more. They want to lead better. They just want to be better at what they're doing. So there might be just behavioral tweaks that we make, communication, leadership styles that we work on, keep them accountable to, new practices that they need to develop, new habits they need to form. The difference between, there's no difference in life coaching or creativity coaching or executive coaching. Executive coaching simply just means that sometimes the company's paying for it and they're not paying for it, but the coaching practice is very much the same, right? You just need to be some help and be held accountable for what you're trying to grow or develop in yourself. And that's what it comes down to. Every call is different. Every coach client, sometimes there's an arc that happens over a coach client relationship, that where you are working on one thing consistently, one thread, one theme, or every individual call can be different too, depending on what's come up that week or that month. Oh my God, shit's changed now. Here's what I'm dealing with now. Now what? Right? So you got to come at it, like you've told me, from a position of anticipation and not expectation. And be ready to respond and listen and ask the right questions to get them reflecting on what that next best step is going to be.
Gosh, thanks for saying that, because it is so hard. It's the number one thing as a coach, is not to be attached to or have expectations around anyone's growth or development, regardless of the capacity that you are as a coach. It's really remaining steadfast with just holding that space. And that's it. So you mentioned questions a couple times. What are some of the most impactful questions that you ask as a coach? Maybe just a couple of them.
Yeah, I think so. A couple of the questions that I think I ask the most are, let's see.
I know there's probably a million, and it all depends on the scenario.
Yeah, if I'm in tough love mode, it's the work of Byron Katie, and I'm asking, is that true? A lot. If people are struggling with mindset, or they're like a dog with a bone on a bad habit or some kind of bad circuit, negative, I should say, circuit. I'm just going to ask that a lot. And then, it might be the 5 whys. Okay, why is that? By the time you ask the question why 5 times and drill deeper, you get to really the core, or closer to the core of the real issue. Behaviorally too, I think for people who are trying to deal with organization and habits and behavior. I think that the question of if you're spending your time on this, what aren't you spending your time on? If you're saying yes to this, what are you saying no to? Is a really important question. And I love metaphors. I love just playing in metaphor because I'm a visual person. So one of the questions I ask a lot is, what is that like? Like, what can you point to in the world that is like? Like, let's find the metaphor. Let's find is it like a mountain? Is it like an ocean? Is it like a road that we're on, like going to this thing? Is it an anthill? Is there, oh, it's a colony? Well, is there a queen, or is it just a bunch of hallways? Oh, so it's a maze, like what is the thing that we're describing? And then having that sense of the visual, the sense of the metaphor really helps you deal with it. And at the same time, you get really concrete when you start talking about a metaphor. And then I'm able to ask questions like, okay, if this was a lever, right, that controlled the flow of water into the canal, then would you say it's open? How far open is it? Is it like a scale, on a scale of 1 to 5? Where is it? Let's say if you were navigating the maze, do you feel like you're in the center battling the Minotaur? Or are you, kind of just, are you 10% of the way through the maze? How far, what percent of the maze are you familiar with? Or do you feel that you've navigated, and where is there cloudiness or uncertainty? It's just about percentages and gauges and levers, and like getting really specific. For me, I find helps the client have more awareness or control or certainty around the mystery or the overwhelm that they're dealing with. And being able to, put a number on it and say, well, I'm at a 2, but I really need to be by Thursday, I need to be at a 4. Like, I need to prep for this thing. I need it to be done. I need to, or I need to have my energy and I need to be hyped for it. Then there's things you can do. Okay, how do you move that lever, and what things need to be in place by Thursday in order to move that 2 to a 4? So the more concrete you get with a metaphor or a visual, the more concrete you can get with language and behavior, I find.
Yeah, because all we have are metaphors to describe our world. So the more accurate the metaphor, the easier it is, I think, for us to not only tell our story from the perspective of where we're at right now, but also where we're going. So recognizing that a lot of the questions that you ask lead to producing a better, stronger story for the end is really important. Mm-hmm. So
I got one eye on the Facebook group. It doesn't look like we have any comments, but again, I just want to encourage people that if you're watching this now or you're watching the replay, please leave a comment below and let us know what you think about the conversation. Yeah, well, thank you so much for all this time, Joran. And thanks for answering these questions about coaching. Because absolutely. What's our theme next week? Theme next week is going to be innovation.